So today we're going to be hearing from Professor Lawrence Dietz in a lecture that's entitled Information as a Domain of War. I've known Larry for over 20 years. I'd say he was an old friend, but he preferred me to say a long time. He's a distinguished leader with a dual career, which spans both the military and commercial sectors. We actually work together at Symantec. Larry has a background in psychological operations, information operations, cyber warfare, electronic warfare, cybersecurity, and public affairs, and he's recognized as a thought leader in those fields. He's a colonel, so Colonel Dietz brings an extensive experience in military intelligence on both strategic and tactical assignments, including open source intelligence role. So he's been around. And in his military career, Colonel Dietz served as the NATO 4-star level and held key positions such as the deputy commander of NATO S4, Combined Joint Information Campaign task force in Bosnia, the PSYOP group staff officer, PSYOP battalion commander, and military intelligence company commander, among others. So his it's the kind of thing when you do something well, they come for more on you. So Larry's been kept pretty busy. His expertise extends to special operations forces, and particularly in the PSYOP, psychological operations, and civil affairs. He then transitioned, not completely, but he transitioned into academia and law, and has become an exceptional educator, which is why he's teaching here. And he does that both in a traditional classroom setting and an online platform. At IWP, he created and teaches an asynchronous online graduate course on intelligence and policy. At Monterey College of Law, he co-developed and taught courses like Negotiation Lab and Data Privacy Elector, as well as the Law of Armed Conflict. So, I could go on I got another page and a half here, but if I'm boring myself, I'm going to turn it over to Colonel Dietz, and please help me welcome.
When you're the talent, you have a handler. Or important to have a handler. Madam President, Ambassador, Dean, you're the Dean, these other people. FIU fan club, worth $5 I gave everybody to show it. When I constructed this lecture, I decided that I was going to do a very high level lecture, but then, if you watch the news, some exciting things have happened lately, and I'm going to try and make this semi-formal. Why semi-formal? Because I can't move from here. I'm handcuffed to the podium so that the videographer can video. I was also told that I have to pretend I'm singing to get to the microphone. So let me start off by just giving you 2 takeaway points. Takeaway point number 1 is that all nations need an information strategy as much as they need a military strategy, an economic strategy, and a diplomatic strategy. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is it is just as important to coordinate weapons on a battlefield that don't blow stuff up or kill people. That's point number 2. I've had the pleasure of working with IWP since January of 2023. This is the first time I'm actually live. I'm mostly an online guy. My first online experience is kind of symptomatic of the quality of people that are at IWP. I tutored a software vendor in Canberra, Australia. I tutored him on what the intelligence function was in the Ministry of Defense of Australia. and how intelligence and policy work together. So it is a great thing for me to be here, and I'm debating whether I'll take questions. I'll take questions when they come up, and I know it's being recorded. So this is what we're going to cover today. And I'm going to start with why the domain of war, and I'm going to relate the domain of information to today's news. And I may offend people, I may be controversial, and then again, I may not. It kind of depends on what your point of view is. But one of the things that an intelligence officer has to do is he has to present the facts and analysis to the commander as he or she sees them, because that's our job. And whether the commander decides to act on them or agree with them is not the decision of the intelligence guy. And for those of you who are technically inclined, you might want to know that to advance the slides, I have to press the down arrow. Should be the up arrow. Sorry, the information war is even being fought today. Then the information war extends to all of the phases of conflict, and I'll get into those a little bit later. And you look at the information war a little bit like the Red Cross. Anybody volunteer for the Red Cross? You would. Look, blood is good. I volunteer for the Red Cross. My wife made me go. I cannot tell the story on the microphone, but if somebody's interested, I'll share it later. And my principal job is I am the volunteer partner to the regional public affairs director, and I've deployed on a number of disasters. And the Red Cross has two expressions, blue sky and gray sky. Blue sky means there's no disaster at the moment, and gray sky means there's a disaster going on. Unfortunately, the information world is gray all the time, and I'm going to touch on the gray zone a little bit later on. Okay. For those of you who are interested, I have a new best friend. It's called Gemini. Anybody know what Gemini is? Google's AI. And I call her a she because it's unpredictable. And I could say that because my wife is a nuclear-powered nurse, and she is here at the American Nurse Association conference, which is how I get to Washington, D.C. I'm kind of a nurse camp follower. And so, technology. All right, AI. So let's talk a little bit about the dimensions of the information environments. You can also think of these as target sets, if you like. And if we look over on the circles there, your classic Venn diagram, and how many people here are stews? Okay. What have I done on that slide that you should do on everything you submit? Cited reference. Exactly right. I do, as I said, online instructing. And one of my favorite comments to my IWP students is, this is an elite graduate experience. You must use references to support your work and demonstrate academic rigor. So I try and do that, and I put my references on there. So the green circle actually represents perception. And the other two circles, the blue represents the human target, and the red represents the physical targets. And we can do several things to physical targets, as you'll see. Attack, defend, and exploit are typically the three major thrusts, three major prongs, if you will, that different information weapons can use. And exploit, for my cyber friends in the back, we all know about the denial of service attack. And why do they call it a denial of service attack? Because it denies service. Tries to deny service. That was not a trick rush. It was an easy. However, what you can do is you can manipulate the data without the data owner. How many people know what data owner means? How many people know where Europe is? Okay. In Europe, they have the GDPR. Anybody know what the GDPR is?
General.
If you FIU people do not know what the GDPR is, you don't deserve to be in a cybersecurity class. The General Data Protection Regulation, which is the de facto international standard on not only data protection, but how elements and people are classified. So the data owner is the person who the data is about, right? That's a very important term. So I can manipulate the data processor, the one who's messing with the data, so that the decision maker is relying on data that is just raw. Just raw. I can send the ammo to where the toilet paper should have gone, and vice versa. And so by manipulating in an unexposed manner, I can touch that red target there, the physical domain target. Now, one of the good things about the big chart like this one is that hopefully, well, at least not everybody's going to read it, but let me just share that when you get the slide deck, it's important to policymakers and analysts to understand the principles behind the information environment. And it's important to be able to measure how you're doing in terms of your activity. So when I talk about the shaping is like the fourth block in, and then the fifth block is evaluating. It's important to see that you can manipulate all of those pieces. But how do you know if you're doing your job? Well, in the PSYOP business, we have two types of measures. Measurements of performance and measurements of effectiveness. Measurement of performance. We drop 50,000 leaflets. Measurement of effectiveness. 10,000 soldiers surrendered. Okay? Measures of effectiveness are far more significant than measures of performance. In the days of my first combat deployment as a radio research, anybody know what radio research is? Anybody know what NSA does? Okay. Well, in the older days, the Army had two branches of military intelligence. One was called the Army Security Agency. And when we deployed to Vietnam, the Army figured that the Viet Cong would not know what we were doing. Of course, the fact they had all these pre-made concertina wires and guards and signs and everything, that was not a clue, right? So we wore signal corps brass, not intelligence. So it's important to see that you can do that with social media and manipulate it. If I say I did 100 posts on Instagram, does that mean anything? No, particularly since I can inflate measures of performance on social media by using AI, bots, and the like. Okay? Okay. I would argue that this is incomplete, and I could blame the Air Force because that's where I got the diagram. I think they're missing two more columns to the left. For those of you who can't read it, the column on the first one says cooperation, the second one says competition, and the third one says conflict. So these are different states in the competition continuum. I would argue that the one next is stasis neutral, and the one before that is hostile. So you would go into an area where the audience, if you will, is hostile to you in your position. So as an example, if you are an American task force, mercenary task force being deployed to a foreign country, immediately there is normally an anti-American field. And it is important to understand that information is across the total continuum, and the name of the game is to move the die. Move the die. I don't have time today to cover detailed planning in terms of information operations, but I will give you any. So we're going to take a look. How many of you are military veterans? That's about there. How many of you were in the information operations business? Ooh, I got a couple of ringers. Okay, good to know. Okay, so at the top level, the big dark circle there, that would be the Defense Department. The second, the defense, and that's for those of you who can't read it, national strategic influence. Then the next level down is theater, and that would be like a geographical combat commander, CENTCOM, as an example. The third one down is operational influence. That would be an AO, an area of operations. So, for example, the stabilization force, when I was there, stabilization force was Bosnia Herzegovina. And that was our AO, our area ventures. And the bottom level is the tactical level. So, from a military rank perspective, for the sake of argument, the tactical level here will be the grade of 06 and below, which would be like my good friend Captain Lane, or Navy, Colonel Butte, Colonel Buckley, Marines, and of course, a hundred there. So those are the multiple levels, and the use of information is totally different across them. How I did a consulting project once for a defense contractor, and we looked at material about psychological operations from each of the services. The Air Force had the best because they were the glitziest. They had color brochures. They were the best. In this case, I think the definition is wrong, because every person involved in an operation, whether they like it or not, is involved in the information war. How could that be? How could that be, Kermit Geeks? Well, if Private Brown burns a Quran or a Torah, and let's say it's the ransack a synagogue in city A and they burn the Torah, then they go next door to the mosque and they burn the Quran. That low-level soldier will make worldwide news. Those videos, those pictures will be worldwide news. So everybody is in the information business. And one of the things that I find a bit dismaying today is that there's this great Chinese guy, Sun Tzu, and he was a big believer in things about the enemy. Know your enemy, know yourself. Okay? Now, to paraphrase my good friend Sun Tzu, if your enemy thinks something is bad, what does that mean to you? It's probably good. So let's take Voice of America, for example. Voice of America, China and Russia said, thank God you're taking that down. Now, even a first level intelligence analyst will say, if the enemy thinks it's bad, maybe it's real. So it's important to understand that everybody is in the information business, and you need to challenge that assumption. This is another picture drawn by my good friend down there. And we have kinetic versus non-kinetic weapons. Kinetic weapons are things that blow stuff up and kill people and injure you. Those are kinetic. And historically, wars are measured by how successful the kinetic weapons are. So, for example, in the Great War in Southeast Asia, when I'd attend the nightly brigade briefings, somebody would brief the currency of war at that time. What statistic was the currency of war in Vietnam? Body count, exactly right. In today's world, that's not the case. The non-kinetic weapon systems are far more impactful than the kinetic ones. And one of the other things is you can use a combination of the two. So having things that blow up can do what to the local population? Harass the local population, make them fearful, make them lose confidence in their government, all of those things. So how does the military coordinate information? things that don't blow stuff up. Well, I have intentionally put a slide I know you can't read just to show the number of parties that can be involved in information operations plans. How many of you have ever served on a general staff or an ambush staff? Okay. I think we would all agree that the approval process can be somewhat tenuous, to say the least. And when I got that many people, how quickly you think a decision could be made? Not very quick. Now, I had the good fortune to spend 14 years as a consultant in the Defense Information School, acronym DINFOS, and I have two colleagues who took part in that. My wife called it the grumpy colonel business because I was part of the team contractors that portrayed the staff of a two-star general. And the premise was that the public affairs students who were senior NCOs and officers were being deployed as a media operations center on a task force run by a two-star general. And we portrayed the staff. Colonel Buckley, who's here, was the 2 and the 9 civil affairs. Mr. Bishop was the voice of all civilian. And so we portrayed that. And the key points that the public affairs people had to understand was that information is hierarchical in the government and that the ambassador outranks the general. And that was a hard pill for many military people to swallow. Trust me on that. So we got the opportunity to do that for 14 years, several times a year. And I got two jobs. My initial job was to be the information operations officer, coordinating all of the systems that don't blow stuff up. And I'm going to get into several of them in a little bit more detail. And that job, I was known as the happy colonel. And then I got promoted to chief of staff as a second job, and that was the grumpy colonel. And in fact, the personality difference was so jarring. I remember one young Air Force statman coming up to me and doing this. Sir, which colonel are you now, the happy one or the grumpy? For she didn't want to talk to the grumpy. Okay. So, the major elements that we're going to talk about today are PSYOP, which can also be called Military Information Support Operations, acronym MISO, Cyberspace Operations, EW, a little bit about MILDEC, and a little bit on each of the other bullets. So what does the IO cell have to do? So this list is actually adapted from the exercise that we did, a notional deployment to Honduras. And so the IO cell, which is part of the operations department, they have to define the information environment. And part of that is the second bullet, because intelligence in the information war is totally different than intelligence on the battlefield. So, for example, if I'm going to a new place that I've never been before, normally I would do what's called an IPB, Intelligence Preparation of the Battlefield. But if I'm in the information world, I have to do like a media landscape. I have to do sort of a marketing and sales plan. And that's quite a bit different. How good is the military at finding that information? Not very good. So does everybody know the difference between a fairy tale and a war story? One starts once upon a time, and the other one starts, this is no pook. Okay? So I was the deputy commander in the information campaign in Bosnia, Sarajevo, and I was given a specific job. The special forces were going to pick up a PIF-WIC, one of my favorite Afghans, person indicted for war crimes, PIF-WIC. And it was our job, given to us by the two-star operations chief, to make sure there was nothing in the press about this guy. And so I had to learn a little bit about the media environment in the area. And so I went to the CJ, two, C meaning combined, more than one nation, J meaning more than one service, and he was a French colonel. which is called kind of French. And I walked in, kind of French. Read. I need to know who is the owner of the TV stations or radio stations in this area. Monsieur, mon ami, I will get you that information. Thank you, sir. And I go back. I go into my office. I sit down. I open my Diet Mountain Dew. The phone rings. And this is Colonel French calling from the CJ2. We would like to know who owns the media. True story. So, if you had the job of trying to figure out which media is the most important media, how would you do it? Well, you'd have to think like a marketing guy. You'd have to think like an advertiser. So you'd get a hold of the radio station. Radio stations are a lot more important than people think, particularly FM radio. It's among the most trusted local resources, global. And you'd say, I'm thinking of advertising. Can you send me a media kit? And for those of you who've never seen a media kit, it basically says, this is how many listeners we have. This is our demographics and so on. Simple. And I can tell you that radio is trusted, FM radio, literally around the world. I had the opportunity to work a wildfire as a public affairs officer for the Red Cross in Northern California. And my boss calls me in, she's marketing director. She's, Larry, I'm having a real problem with this local radio station. Can you help me out? I said, counter propaganda? Boss, I can do that. Counter propaganda. So I put in my little earpiece. I went out in the smoke and I called into the radio. And I said, my name's Larry Dietz. I'm a public affairs officer with the Red Cross. I'll take your listeners' questions. And so I was on live, unscripted radio for 15 minutes, which was pretty challenging. So the interview ends. The guy says, can you come into the studio for a formal interview? I said, sure, because I knew I could get a real non-Red Cross lunch if I went down. I was incented to do that. And so prior to going to the radio station, I toured a couple of the shelters where the people impacted by the fire were staying. And everyone that had a radio on was listening to this FM station. I later found out it was community-supported FM station. And so it was very highly trusted. Okay, so this is what we do. Did I circle anything? Oh, yeah. The other thing that is not on here is to determine and recruit local key personnel that can help with messaging and supporting information efforts of the friendly force. Why is that a good idea? So first, raise your hand. Pretend it's a college. Yes, sir.
You get your message better localized.
Localized is one. What else? Yes, sir.
Increases adoption efforts.
Increases adoption. Adaption, yeah. I'm looking for one word begins with a C. Yes, sir.
Oh, that's the word, but they're trusted.
Trusted. Credibility. That's exactly where I was going. Because the more the people trust the speaker, the more likely they are to believe the message. Okay. So. Okay, so I had these tasks labeled as pre and post, but actually that's not the case as I went over this on the interminable airplane from San Francisco yesterday. It's a cycle. You have to continually refine the information war battle plan. Okay. So now let's switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about the main components. My personal favorite, psychological operations. And the definition there is pretty simple. Use whatever measures you can, whatever means, methods you can, to influence the target population to do what's needed to support the boss, the command. So it could be as simple as coming up with a plan to say, we're going to have a big convoy on this road. We want you to keep your cars off it. Or people who are impacted by the floods can go to this location for lodging and food and medical repair. Or surrender now because tomorrow we're going to bomb the hell out of this neighborhood. So PSYOP has face-to-face capability. PSYOP has traditional media capability, radio, TV, and print. And print can be really, really important. People minimize print. We had a situation in Bosnia where there was going to be an election. Elections are very important if you're trying to instill democracy. And so the Bosnian government agency responsible for getting the ballots printed sent out RFPs, awarded the bid, and they got back all kinds of sample ballots. The printer did not put in the name of the candidates, they just left the samples in. So the PSYOP force had to reprint the ballots. So traditional. And more PSYOP and special operations are getting involved in the outline. And it's important to know what's going on in the armor. So there's a giant list there, but let me just give you a couple of key points. One is you have to leverage the locale. You have to understand localization, and you have to understand credibility. You want to try and have as many partners, partner countries, and maybe NGOs as is practical under the situation. You want to enhance the legitimacy, the perception of rightness, if you will, of your force. And you want to disrupt those that are trying to negatively impact the government that you are supporting. You also have to deal with, and increasingly now, proxies. Proxies are becoming far more important. My personal favorite used to be Wagner, but it didn't end well for the Mr. Wagner. I don't know if there was a Mr. Wagner, but the Russian guy in charge of that now, I don't think he did well. Okay, so what are some of the obstacles to gaining an information advantage? You'll find that there's a number of DoD publications on information advantage, information superiority. I'm not going to cover them today, but the information environment is always fragmented, and you have to analyze the information environment a number of ways, geographically, demographically, just a variety of ways. And there's a lot of bias out there. Bias on the part even of the principals. Because I could go to the commanding general and then I could say, sir, based on our research, we think A, B, C, and D. And he says, speak out or big so, and I'm like, yeah. Got to deal with it. Attenuated approval cycles. That's the kiss of death. That is one area where America and NATO typically are behind the 8 ball because everybody gets a vote. Everybody gets a vote. And if you never served on NATO staff, they are assigned by country and rank, not necessarily by most qualified officer put a spot. Countering the adversary. Well, you have to try and get ahead of the information loop of the other guy. How many have heard of the OODA loop? Observe, orient, decide, and act. It was originally developed for fighter pilots. But the information world is the same. And unfortunately, excuse me, I don't see how America existed before Costco. So the information loop is moving fast, particularly social media. And it is important to synchronize all of your channels so that you are able to synergize your messages and you're not performing information fratricide, if you will. One of the areas I'm starting to follow is AI. And I get AI from my students sometimes. Professor Needs, I need to know you're AI. Oh, that's not for me.
Maybe it is.
Maybe it is. Well, I knew because the English was perfect, and yours is not. You have never used an apostrophe and a possessor in 6 weeks. And you persist on putting World War II with the Arabic II instead of the Roman II. That's how I knew it was AI about you. So anyway, deep fakes, bots, it's coming. It's already here, actually. In fact, my analogy to you today would be we've all seen the innovative use of drones lately all over. And that's come as a surprise to many people. And so I think AI will be the new drone in the sense of the use of AI will become ubiquitous and innovative and surprise a lot of people. Okay. All right, switching gears. Cyberspace operations. The three axes here are the ones I told you before: attack, defend, exploit. And with cyber, I might even say manipulate. Although we haven't seen that yet. One of my personal favorites is Titan Rain. How many of my Florida cybersecurity weenies have ever heard of Titan Rain? Raise your hand. Are you really cybersecurity? Have you heard of the People's Republic of China? Okay, well, you might want to Google Titan Rain. Okay? The exploitation of weakness vulnerabilities in IT infrastructure. The Chinese, I think, are personally my personal favorite. They're the best. And what's harder about cyberspace defense? What is the hard part about cyberspace defense if you're in the federal government? Guy way in the back.
For space here, if it's international law,
Well, international law in cyber is not as effective as a pork chop at bar mitzvah. So that's not really a good one. I think the real issue is that most of the IT critical infrastructure is outside the government's control. That's one of the reasons it makes it very difficult. Another reason is that the hacker world has adopted what used to be the philosophy of IBM at one point in time, which was, lower the skill level of the user. And so hacking tools have become democratized. Hacking is not hard. It can be tedious and boring and time-consuming, but it is not hard. And if you like time and passion, you can be a hacker. Also, I teach. I sit as a Red Cross volunteer. My wife and I are international humanitarian law expert instructors for the Red Cross, and as a byproduct of that, I developed a half-a-day workshop on cyberspace and the law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, which at the very best is squishy. And I could wax eloquently on that for hours, but I'm not going to. So let's just say cyberspace operations: attack, defend, exploit, and soon manipulate. Electronic warfare is often neglected, but I think it's useful to point out that in today's world, we have electronic warfare can be used at the tactical level. So let's suppose, for example, we are a SWAT team. Da-da-da, da-da-da, one of my wife's favorite programs. SWAT, okay? So we have a hostage situation. And the hostage takers are trying to get to their boss. What would I do to make sure that they're not able to do that? Jam their phones, absolutely correct. So electronic warfare, jam the phones. Another one is, how many of us cannot get anywhere without our GPS? Okay. How many of you have seen the movie The World Is Not Enough? James Bond, Elliot Carver, dirtbag, right? Elliot Carver gets the little red box that jams the GPS of the poor British destroyer that gets. So, and you'll see some of my examples. I have cyber examples, if I get to them, that the GPS can carry. So, and then there's another item How many of you have ever heard of an LRAD? What's an LRAD?
It's a long-range acoustic device.
That's right. Sometimes called the sound counting. Weapon is good. Used by law enforcement for crowd control. A lot of arguments that turns people deaf. So, non-lethal, doesn't kill people.
It's lethal, though. The hearing.
Well, okay. Lethal means you're dead.
Well, I mean,
It'll kill your hearing,
a lot of your life, you know,
but you're still not dead.
I mean, if you had hearing before, you don't have it.
I'm with you. Okay. Point taken. No. I'm married to the same woman for 55 years. As my friend Ken Rogers used to say, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold. Military deception. How many of you have gone to see the Broadway show Operation Mincemeat? Okay. How many even know what I'm talking about?
Have not.
Okay. Well, Broadway is in New York. They have a lot of theaters. Sorry. Operation Mincemeat, based on a World War II operation conducted, I think, by the British, where they basically threw a corpse into the ocean off Spain. And they made a fake identity for the corpse and gave him papers and everything else. And the purpose was to throw the Germans off on about the operation to invade Sicily, the Allied operation at Big Sicily. And so that's all about military deception. And I think the deception world was an area where we're going to see some more interesting innovations due to my good friend artificial intelligence. Public affairs. They like to consider themselves the ministers of truth. And public affairs officers on a military staff are considered special staff, which means they report directly to the commander, like the JAG and the Chaplain, Judge Advocate General, Chaplain. And they get private time with the boss. And depending upon the environment, the public affairs people may or may not want to work with anybody else. The fact of the matter is that public affairs is another non-kinetic weapons system, and everybody works for the commander. So everybody has to work together to achieve the objectives. Civil military operations. This is where experts from the military who are in civilian life experts. So we deployed to Bosnia in the Army. How many people have heard of the Army? At his birthday. The U.S. Army has a reserve command called the U.S. Army Civil Affairs and PSYOP Command, acronym JUSICAPOT. Not a great acronym. And both of those are deployed a lot. And so when we went to Bosnia, our counterpart, the Civil Affairs group, came in 6 weeks ahead of us. But we were both from California for that particular rotation. And that group had everything from psychologists to agricultural experts. And so their job was to support the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina with some additional resource that they wouldn't have had prior. It's an outcrop of World War II, I think it started. OPSEC. OPSEC is a function of the operations department. And one of the greatest things I can tell you about OPSEC is that everybody has to pay attention. So, for example, not a good idea to put on Facebook, "Hi, this is me in the transport plane. I'm on my way to Bayer Base where I'm going to be for a while." Not a good idea. So, operational security of function verified. Okay, everybody with me so far? Yes. Okay. How am I doing? I'm going to go through a couple of examples, and I'm going to leave a few minutes for questions. Okay, PSYOP to Ukraine. It says, Ukraine doubles down on PSYOP campaign against North Korean troops. Why would you pick North Korean troops? Yes, sir.
As there's basically the
Yeah!
They're from North Korea, which is a long way from Ukraine. They're far from home. They're in a country that they don't speak the language. They don't understand. They don't know why they're there. Good target. This one are airstrikes, artificial intelligence, and sabotage-driven Russian psyops. Now, for those of you who are linguistic experts, only America calls it psyop. The other countries call it psyops with a S, my British friends in particular. My good friends in the Bundeswehr, who knows what the Bundeswehr is? It's the German army. Call it operational information. Okay? This stands for the principle that I can combine kinetic weapons, airstrikes, high-tech tools, AI, human operations, covert ops, sabotage, and bundle those acts together as PSY-acts, psychological operations acts, to impact the target. Okay? This one stands for the principle that the use and impact of proxies cannot be understated. The use and impact of proxies cannot be understated. And the Middle East is probably the best example of that. And we're seeing that unfold yet today. Sure. Okay, FIU guys. I teach cyber war online, and I ask students to develop an attack plan. What are the top 2 targets most undergraduate students pick for cyber attack? Yes, in the back.
Social media.
Speak up.
Social media.
Social media is a medium. It's not a target.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. What part of the infrastructure?
Power.
Power is one. What's the other one?
Okay.
What?
Reaches.
One at a time.
Waters.
Waters, baby. No, but that's not. It should be, but it's not.
Information.
Information, no. Finance.
Information.
Show me the money. See? The challenge with cyberspace ops is it's kind of like a pandemic. Sometimes it takes a longer time for the impact to be felt. But if you want to really harass Americans, you want to make sure those ATMs don't work. You see how fast people get unhappy.
Luggage works.
Okay. The reference on this is actually from my good friends at GCHQ. GCHQ. How many of you follow GCHQ? How many even know what I'm talking about? It's the British NSA. GCHQ. How about MI6? All right, what's the most important things happened to MI6 this week?
Female.
First female director and sister. Cyberspace Ops Ukraine. Lessons learned. I have 4 for you. 1. Defense against military invasions require most countries to disperse and distribute digital data operations across borders to other countries. 2. Advances in threat intelligence and endpoint protection have helped the Ukraine withstand high percentages of attacks. 3. As a coalition of countries has stepped up to defend the Ukraine, Russian intelligence agencies and their proxies have upped their game. And last, lessons from Ukraine call for a coordinated, comprehensive strategy. Coordinated, comprehensive strategy. There's something you don't see every day. To strengthen defenses. Okay. All right, Jenna. I got about 10 minutes. Let's move on. Wiretap here, the source is wiretap. USAID was a big help in Ukraine's cyber war with Russia. Well, the principle here is you can't just cut everything with a chainsaw. But you have to be a little specific what you do. Civilians have been mostly the victims of cyber attacks in Gaza. And there had been heavy use of phishing and denial of service attacks. All right, I talked about the GPS jamming. NATO has decided that it needs a new paradigm. What does that mean? It means that they have to be quicker and more innovative. And I think I'm just going to take one more slide and then I'll open it up for questions. And the bottom line here is that you need to control the narrative. The narrative is the perception. The narrative is the perception. Okay, very important. And all of your information activities are geared to controlling the narrative. Okay, I have about 10 minutes left. I still have some prepared material, but I wanted to see if there are any questions from the audience. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Yes, sir.
Thanks. So, quick question for you. As you look at the domains of warfare, you alluded to it. One of the things that's unique about information warfare is that it's more democratized, but the government doesn't know what control means.
Correct.
The adversary is routinely faster than we are with narrative warfare and information warfare. How do we get faster and more effective?
That's a really good question. I think we need to have more of a unified approach to information warfare in the sense of we need to have a national strategy out of the White House that says this is the national information strategy. I think on the military level, we had to recognize that information operations needs to be a significant career path, maybe even a branch. We need to make perhaps the Army the proponent for it and take the War school that's been established at Fort Bragg and make that the lead dog. And I believe they're already doing part of that. They're expanding military dissection curriculum there. And also increase the proportion of non-Army personnel that are trained in information operations. That would be my shoot from the hip. Was one right next to me. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Scop Ukraine. One of the things that you said that struck me is you call it Sun Tzu, know your enemy. In the 1980s, I worked for an office in Paris called Soviet Area Audience and Opinion Research, which was affiliated with Radio Liberty in Munich. And we managed to know what the average Soviet citizen was thinking by interviewing them in Western Europe, tourists, visitors, en masse, thousands. And we got that right. The experts got it wrong. Now, my question is, how would you rate or evaluate the current administration's ability to know Russia?
Not good. The administration has taken an axe, a Viking axe. They eliminated the GEC, Global Exploitation Center, that was. That was his
Engagement Center.
Thank you, Global Engagement Center of the State Department that was charged with monitoring. It has gutted Voice of America, Radio Liberty, Marti, all of those things that the enemy has already conceded bothered them. Not good. That was an easier question than I thought. Let's get one guy in the back there. He's been very helpful. Everybody pays the same amount for their ticket, right? So those seats are good too. Yes, sir.
So, but I know that
Add into your point from earlier, with regard to the cyber operations and defense, wouldn't you say that the ambiguity, because listening to you more and more, would the ambiguity of those international laws prevent, kind of where we need to be to establish, a good AI space and a good cyberspace?
Well, the ambiguity of the law is a problem. However, the talented manual on cyber is probably a really good corpus of law. part of the issue is there's no enforcer. International humanitarian law is all voluntary. There's no sheriff who rides in the town as it blows the whistle, says, Israel, 50-yard penalty. Hamas, 100-yard penalty. No, there's no enforcement. So it's a double-edged sword. We have the laws are maybe not as good, but there's no international enforcement. That's the big problem, might be. Fred, you didn't just get Ricky.
What? What? Okay. What non-kinetic weapon do you believe will be the most important for the U.S. to invest in over the course of the next 20 years?
Well, at the risk of being super obvious, I'm a big AI fan. I think AI is an incredible tool, partially because it's three-dimensional. I can use AI to do pictures. I can do AI to do deep fakes. I can use AI for DDoS. I mean, it's just incredibly versatile. But is it going to be like the bad guy in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies? You know, is it ever going to take over the world? It was even the bad guy in the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible, fighting the virus. Give me a break, you know. But I think that's the issue, AI for sure. And if I could really speculate, I've been also following quantum computing. Okay. And how many have heard of the RSA conference? RSA conference is only the biggest cybersecurity conference in the U.S., probably the world. Okay. I've been fortunate to be a speaker there many times. This year, I gave a talk, Information is a Domain of War, but I went around to a number of seminars. And the quantum computing thing was interesting to me. The cryptographers panel, we had two guys talking about cyber currency, little afield from your question. And cyber currency, the math people, the S in RSA, Shamir, he felt that the technology is sound, but the way it's implemented is not. And so I see kind of the perfect storm here of people putting more money electronically, more AI, and maybe 5-10 years more of computing power quantum. And that's going to put a lot of things out of control of human beings, I think. Bit of a speculative answer. One more question, says my handler. Give it to the gentleman with the glasses. My plans.
So you've made it clear that a lot of these schools are essential. You have to compete on the information battlefield. How, in an administration and environment where, in many cases, for good reasons, there's the desire to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, but as you said, to take your chainsaw to both things. How do you make these tools more politically palatable to a crowd with more isolationist bent or a, reduce to the size of government?
You need a national strategy. And the national strategy would incorporate my good friend Clausewitz, ends, ways, and means. What are the objectives I'm trying to establish? What's the ends? How am I going to get there? The ways. And what are the resources I need? The means. You got to have a clear strategy. Is that it, Madam Handler? One more, okay. Oh, way in the back. I don't know if we can get a microphone all the way in time. Oh, too late, it's lunchtime.
Takes question. So you spoke about how you, as part of your previous work, you grabbed the locale for operations and to turn it to your advantage. Did you ever use information, either local information or proxies as an early warning system for a threat?
Well, not me personally, but I'm going to save you 2 hours of your life. I went to a presentation at a conference once where the guy said that Twitter, you remember Twitter, the amount of tweets was an indication of the public's concern. So as a Red Cross volunteer, disasters, we followed the number of tweets until it peaked. That's when the disaster started going away. So that's the only thing I could tell you personally. We good? Thank you.